thanks to the fine people at CPI for again allowing me to share this time with you today, and I hope that we get a little bit out of this. I've got 35 years of healthcare, so I've been in the business that long, clinical backgrounds, critical care. Don't ask me to do anything or even touch a patient right now because I would be not safe, okay? So most of it's been doing some other things. And those other things have been 26 years as a chief nursing officer. So most of my life has been spent in the C-suite, working with the very people that we have to make sure that we always try to help understand what we need them to understand to move forward with the things that we want to do in our priorities. My educational background is I went to the University of Mary Hardin-Baylor. That's where I got my Bachelor of Science in Nursing. Notice there is no year there and it doesn't matter. It's a long time ago and we'll leave it at that, okay? And then I got my master's degree at St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas. That master's degree is in Human Services Administration, and that has to do with human resources or HR background. And at the time, which was about 15 years ago, I didn't even realize how important that would become later on, but that was an interest I had. I go back to, nobody comes to my office and says, Sally, hey, we're having a few confusing conflicts with interpreting these ABGs, can you help us? Not one person asks me that question. Every day, 5 times a day, there's some human resource related question that comes in. So not that the degree actually helped me answer those questions, but it was kind of more getting me organized and kind of building a understanding of how those things work. And then more recently, I completed my doctorate from Texas Tech University Health Science and Center in the Great Plains of Texas. So it's 6 hours driving, whether you're driving 95 miles an hour or 45 from Austin to Lubbock. Okay, and you do that. We had to do that every month. So we finally got that accomplished there. And the most important part about that was my whole doctoral work was contributed to what we're going to talk about today, and it has to do with kind of understanding in nonviolent crisis intervention, and does it really make a difference? So the question we're really trying to work at today is, does what you're here to learn about to teach, does what NCI training was meant to do, does it make a difference, and can we prove it? And I think by the time we get through with this, your answer is going to be yes. And you're going to be able to prove it to whoever it is you need to prove it to, whether it's yourself, someone beside you, a colleague, or your senior team. And what you're going to be able to prove it with is the next note, and it's the first published violence-related QI study. There's a lot of literature about in the research. There's a lot of literature about cause and effects and various things that happen, but this is the only published study. This is the good news and the bad news. We've got one out there. The bad news is we've got one out there. So it's the first published study that actually proves something, that the intervention of CPI, Nonviolent Crisis Intervention training, makes a difference. And then not only was I able to share this time with you today, I also had the opportunity to share this on an international basis at the 4th International Conference of Violence in the Healthcare Sector, and that was in Miami. So not that that's such a great big deal, but there's a lot of interest, I think, in trying to look at studies that actually are meaningful, that actually show something happened. And we're going to try and walk through that. I promise you, this is a study. This does have a lot of stuff in it that's a little academic, and I know this is a long week and hopefully a shorter day for you. So we're going to try and keep it as moving fast pace as we can. Okay, so I'll keep that going. There is a gentleman in the back of the room on his phone, obviously terribly thrilled to listen to this for the 800th time. His name is Andy Gillam. Not only am I married to him, that's beside the point, but he's the statistician behind this, and the statistician is who I actually put his eyes on the data and actually found the correlations. And that's why I want to give him full credit, all right? So he's back there. So if you're going to ask me hard questions mathematically related, that's who we're going to go to, okay? All right? All right, so moving on. What I like to do is, I'm real big about storytelling. I think it's real important. I mean, I think many of us, if you've turned the TV on lately, you know, we feel very concerned about the poor people in Lafayette, Louisiana, who just had a terrible disaster occur. So our thoughts and prayers are certainly with those people right now as we talk about violence. I think it's worth a moment to think about them right now. What I'm also going to talk to you about is a little bit of background behind what's going on out there in the world. Why is this such a big, big problem? You'll notice OSHA, who cares about what people do, how our safety in our workplace, what you know, everything from do we have enough fire extinguishers, do we have training protocols on safety issues. Look what they did. They cited a hospital for inadequate workplace violence safeguards. meaning that they went into this hospital. It's a hospital in Queens, Manhattan, up in New York. So I hope nobody's from that organization. If you are, I won't say much more, okay? Clue me in, all right? But it's a picture, the picture of this hospital is down below. And what's interesting about this is the visibility that workplace violence has, and it's increasing all the time. And I think through many of the various sessions that you've been through today or this week, you notice that things aren't getting better, things are getting worse. We've just got to be able to continue to work on trying to meet that delta. And so despite the evidence and the obvious things that are going on in the workplace today, employers still don't recognize this, and this is completely unsatisfactory. It's unacceptable, it's unfair to our employees, it's unfair to us, and it's unfair to our patients. Hopefully most of you in here, I think, are in healthcare. Is that correct? I think you might be focused that way. We might have some audience guests who might be in different sectors, for example, education. If you are, just bear with us. This is kind of healthcare related, but I think you can just see with workplace violence, it certainly is applicable to just about everywhere. A little more background, Scientific American. You've probably seen this journal. You might have even read it. It's not necessarily a peer-reviewed journal, but it's a very big journal that a lot of people read. It gets a lot of public interest. And what I want to call your attention to is this big red line on the bottom in this bottom paragraph. And I'll read it because you probably can't see it very well, but it says, the assault is far from an isolated incident. Healthcare workers are hit, kicked, scratched, bitten, spat on, threatened, harassed with surprising regularity. So that's just showing you some of the areas that workplace violence includes. It's going to get worse than this, but that's what Scientific American reported on. The other thing I think that's important is look at the title. Epidemic. That's all you got to see is the first word. Epidemic of violence against healthcare workers plagues hospitals. One more, then we'll bring it down to what really motivated me. I'm from the state of Texas, and in Texas we have the great fortune of having one of the largest Army bases in the United States, if not the world, Fort Hood. Probably many of you may have been watching the news, years ago, that we had a gentleman I use the word lightly. He was an officer in the Army. He also was a physician, and one day he went to work and he made some very unfortunate decisions. I don't know all of the details about what was in his head at the time, but he actually pulled live weaponry out, and he actually shot his colleagues, and he shot many people. Many people were killed. And what was interesting about this, it's not the devastation, that's interesting in and of itself, but what's interesting about this is there was a big complex conversation about was this terrorism or was this workplace violence? And it actually was deemed workplace violence. It was not deemed an internal terroristic act. So what's important about this is the government's getting involved, the government's using definitions, and the government's titling things like this as workplace violence. So when you look at the last article we just spoke about, and you look at this article we just spoke about, that just defined the scope of workplace violence from someone has offended me verbally all the way to I've been murdered. Quite a large definition and quite a heavy weight for those of us who share the same focus here, which is to try and reduce some of these issues. So again, that's just giving you an idea of what's going on in the world. There's many more, you can find so many more examples. This is just a few. So getting back to me, my background and motivation, because there's always motivation. Most people, well, all of you in here have motivation for why you do this. Many of you do this on a voluntary basis. Many of you do this to help other people. We all have that in common, and so there's something that motivated you to do this. It's from deep in your heart, or something happened that motivated you. Well, something happened that motivated me to actually spend my entire doctoral studies on this. It was a way, I think, for me to deal with this personally, and it was also a way for me to help make a difference, and that's why I'm here too. Normal spring morning back in 2006, so you can tell I'm still not over this. So I'm living proof that things happen and I still have to talk about it, okay? So living proof. Entered the hospital about 8:20. The OR director came in to me and said, Sally, actually she's British, so she had this beautiful accent. Sally, there tends to be water dropping from the first floor in from OR 9. Well, you don't have to be a genius to know water dropping from a floor into your OR is really not a good thing. So, but we had a lot of construction going on, condensation. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on in the OR that can cause these things to happen, but you just know it's never good. I didn't know how bad it was going to get. Next, smoke alarms are sounding. I just said we had a lot of construction going on, a lot of things were happening, so what do you get? Alarm fatigue. Have you ever been in your organization to where something's going on and you're like, oh, that's the fire alarm again, they must be testing something? We had that too, we were not immune from it. Going on a little bit of a long time. I was the administrator on call. I was also the incident commander should anything happen in our organization. So I thought, maybe I need to be a little bit more responsible and let me go upstairs and let's see what's happening. So I go to the elevator. Elevator access denied. Far be it from me to climb one set of stairs, right? So the elevator access was denied. And so I climbed all the way up to the second floor. And then when I opened the door, it was Armageddon. I opened the door. Smoke was at least 2/3 of the way down. And this is a large, fairly large expanse of a 37-bed med-surg unit. It was chaotic. It was unbelievable. The water on the floor was 2 to 3 inches deep. Water hoses were all over the place. People were scrambling everywhere. There was the water that was seeping down into the ORs. This is why the alarms were going on. A patient was screaming. I couldn't tell what exactly was going on just yet, but that patient was literally screaming. There was a lot of screaming going on, but you could hear this person over that. A little bit later, I knew that we had a complete 5-alarm fire unfolding, and what happened was a patient decided to set himself on fire to kill himself. The picture to the right is the Austin American-Statesman. That's our local newspaper, and this was on the front page. You can see Wednesday, May 3rd, patient sets himself on fire, closing the ER. Well, our ER is a fairly significant sized ER, and I know we've got some great ED leaders in the room. Our ED proper sees about 75,000 ED visits a year, which is a significant amount. Our ED service line sees in excess of 100,000 a year. We have 2 urgent cares that send a lot of business to us, but we're going to talk specifically about our ED proper. The ED, this actually isn't all true. The ED was not shut down. The ED was shut down to the public. We had to take the ED and we had to put it into a state where we could take care of our family members, our patients who were critically injured if they weren't going to ICU. We made it a triage area for our staff. Our staff had smoke inhalation problems. Our staff had panic attacks. There was everything in the world going on. So we're managing that. We're trying to run the operations of the hospital. The ORs, we have 12 ORs that were in a state of array. We had open heart patients on the table. We had to make tremendous decisions in an instant with what was happening. Not to mention, we had this gentleman screaming this when I looked at him. I did it on purpose. I wanted to die, and I wanted to take all of you with me. So it was intentional. He knew what he was doing, and he wanted to do it. I personally, some people leave breadcrumbs. I'd like to video journal for some reason, and this is just what I did, I think, to get through this. That is my actual picture of his bed. This patient was actually an altered mental status patient. I don't recall a specific diagnosis from him that was mentally related. However, obviously there were some issues with that. Back in this day, in 2006, we did not necessarily strip any patient down of what they carried in through the emergency department. So we allowed him to keep his jeans on, and we just put a gown over his top to make him comfortable, because that's what we tried to do, right? Calm him down, make him comfortable. So we've since learned a few more things for safety of our organization. We now make sure we have everybody kind of looked at, and we put special colored gowns on people so we know kind of what to expect. This gentleman, what he did, he had taken his sheets, and he had enough room. You can see there's a light restraint through on him, but that was just because he was trying to pull out his oxygen tube. He had some nasal cannula on, and so he had taken the sheets and he had nested the sheets. He had kind of pulled the sheets up and made the nest. He had 2 cigarette lighters in each pocket. He dumped the butane from the cigarette lighters into the nest. He was in an oxygen-rich environment, set himself on fire, and it just flamed up. And so the room is black. This is the bed. I have further graphic pictures, but I was trying to be respectful of the audience. That's actually his entire skin stuck to the bed there in those black spots. He did not survive. That's a very interesting question. We could talk, somebody asked me, could we talk a little bit longer about those kinds of problems? The problems that the staff encountered and the problems that this person had, he eventually succumbed about 10 hours later, but we took him to our ICU. We are not a burn unit at our organization. Our hospital is 328 beds. It does a lot of things. We're in process of getting to level 2 trauma, but at this time we did not have that. And so to put him in the ICU, we were taking care of him, and the dynamics with the staff merely to take care of this person after they understood he did this on purpose and was trying to kill everyone. There was some interesting dynamics and some interesting need for the very things that you do for a living, okay? So you can see it just got even more complicated. We spent months dealing with this. What actually scared me even further as it continued was one of the Austin Fire Department commanders spoke to me. We were debriefing this, and he said, "Sally, what you need to understand is this man was next to an elevator shaft. Elevator shafts apparently draw oxygen into it." And he said if a PCT, patient care technician who'd been on the job 6 months, had not gone and turned the main oxygen lever off, this could have erupted the whole tower, which has 3 floors on top of it. So we could have had tremendous mass casualties because of this. That's my motivating story. So workplace violence to me was more than a buzz phrase on that day. I have not stopped thinking about it since then, but I've tried to make it constructive. And so that's what leads us into this. So what are our objectives today? That's the story, that's how I got here, that's why I'm interested in it, so it's all legitimate, okay, how we got here. We're going to share some insights from the original quality improvement study. I promise we're not going to go so deep that it's so terribly boring, but it'll get the point across to you, okay? And we're going to look at some core findings and confounding influences. A confounding influencer are just those things that people tend to question. Did you think about this, this, and this? When you were coming up with your data, when you're coming up with your information, what about this, what about that? So those what abouts are going to be our confounding factors. We're going to try and share how the study helps justify NCI training in reluctant organizations. I don't know about you, but sometimes we see reluctance. We see competing problems. We see issues to where our senior leadership team isn't necessarily as committed as perhaps you and I are to seeing how important NCI training is. We're going to, look at the competition between tight financial focus. I know at our organization, everything is about what can we get for the dollar, and I think it's the way healthcare's going, and I think it's getting worse, and so we're going to have our challenges. Initiatives to compete for limited resources, and as you and I both know, guess what's usually the first thing to go, at least our hospital? Education. It's like, can't you do that faster? Can't you do it quicker? Can't they just watch a video? Can't they just do something online? And the answer is, of course, especially for this, no, this is a human being, exchange of information, and that's very hard to always convince people of. So NCI training investments were challenging. We had patient and nursing issues. We had to constantly compete for the training resources. So if you all find yourself in this position right now, it's the exact position I found myself in. And this, you guys, is even after the situation that happened in 2006. So what we did is we created an approach to try and defend this training investment. So we're going to talk about that. Okay, so the published study. So here's a little bit about the study so you know what's going on and why. It was a 1-year duration, so we have 1 year's worth of data. So when I talk about Andy being our statistician, the data, our dining room table was like a complete war zone for data. And so the data was absolutely tremendous to get. And so we looked at that. Our setting, at this time, the hospital was 304 beds. It's in the center, it's an urban hospital in Austin, Texas. The study target was our primary ED. Some people have said, well, have you looked at the whole hospital? Yes, we look at the whole hospital, but for the purposes of this study, so to make a true statistically significant finding, we maintained it in the ED. You've got to be able to control some variables. The roles that we looked at was education relating to registered nurses, patient care technicians, paramedics, unit clerks, and managers. The physicians, when I was telling the physicians about this, they're like, so what? You don't care about us? Another thing that you don't care about is the physicians. The reason we left the physicians out is because, as you well know, if you offer financial resources to a physician with our Stark laws, with laws that have to do with physician reimbursement, they see this as, if I gave a physician money to go to NCI training, then they're going to think that if that physician brings patients to our hospital, it was entitlement. And so we said, that's too complicated, we're going to leave that out. So we still wanted to try and prove our study. So that's why they were left out, not because we don't love them or we don't want their safety to be paramount importance. It was just the complicating factors. Some general study metrics, this is what it was around, is a code purple. And I'll define a code purple. A code purple is what we use at our organization to alert and to reach out, to call for help. If I find myself in a very uncomfortable situation and I need to reach out to a code team, just like you would if someone's having a heart attack, if someone, if there's inclement weather, if someone fell on the floor and there's a fall, if you call a team, that's what we call the code purple. There are no parameters around a code purple, meaning we didn't say, well, you have to have these 4 things in line before you can call a code purple, or you've got to go through the nursing supervisor before you call a code purple. No, not at all. If today I felt uncomfortable because someone's looking at me wrong or something's going on, we have the right to call a code purple. The whole team comes, and that team is comprised of nursing supervisors, the critical care charge nurse, someone from plant operations, our security officer, and then if necessary, someone does show up who's an armed guard, and then what happens is they peel away if they notice, if it's not quite as complicated as we need, but we have the team there, and then they peel away as they notice the people who are trained in NCI doing their job, and it's working. But they're back. We have backup in case it doesn't work. So I've been asked the question, well, why didn't you prioritize? Don't people get upset with you because you call these code purples and nothing really happened? And the answer is, that's the best code purple. Call it, don't have anything happen, let's go on with business. That's perfect. So absolutely not. Our staff are empowered to call, and anyone can do it. How do they do that? We got asked this question yesterday, so I'm trying to answer these as we go. Our nurses carry SpectraLink phones, and most of the time SpectraLink phones work. And so when they're working, nurses know this, when they're working, that's great. So they've got it right on their hip. We have panic buttons scattered throughout the hospital. The emergency department has a plethora of panic buttons in all different places, and then we have them at other places in the hospital. So that's how people can call code purple. So hopefully that answers any questions about that area, because that's a big deal.
Do you have an overhead paging
Yes,
system?
and we have that too. We have that too. And they carry on their little badges, they carry those numbers if they need to call. So we feel that our staff are very empowered, and there is no retribution if they call and nothing happened. None. We encourage it. So that's a paradigm shift from some organizations, and we've worked on that to make sure that happens. Okay, so in our emergency department, we had 111 code purples over that little over 76,000 ED visits for the study period. Remember, everything I'm talking about with the study is for the study period, so you got to kind of block it into that section. We had a mean rate of 1.46 code purples per 1,000 ED visits. So that just gives you kind of how many happened and what happened. 55% of all code purples happened in the ED. We certainly measure them all throughout the house. There were many more code purples occurring throughout the house, but this is just relevant to the ED, so 55% of code there. With statistics, there's always some interesting information. The most active month was June at 2.6 code purples, and the least active month was January. That actually means nothing other than just interesting finds if you ever wanted to know what month, at least in our hospital for this year. It looks like something was a little more hectic in June than it was in January. All of these type of pieces of information that weren't germane to this study are just ripe for someone to say, hey, I'd like to take that information and do another study. So any of you who want to do another study, just give me a call and we'll work on it. Not all at one time, okay, just, I know. So we'll do that. Some general metrics we looked at, you'll notice some of these poses to be very familiar, probably to the right, but NCI training was offered to all patient care staff at our facility expense. Remember, we only measured the ED for the study, but our hospital offers it to all of those people we listed across the hospital. At the onset of our study, 42% of our ED personnel were previously trained. Why that's important is we had this training going on long before we decided to do this study. We didn't have the training as high as we needed to have it, but we had it going on, so we had to account for that. At the end of the study period, 75% of the ED staff were NCI trained. So at the end of that 1 year, we had moved the needle to having 75% trained. That's going to be an important component in a few minutes. During the study period, these last 3 bullets have to deal with full-time equivalents and turnover and how many people were hired, how many people left for employment, all those kinds of things. When you do a study, you have to be so incredibly accurate that you make accounts for turnover and, yeah, well, you had everybody hired, but then 3 people left, so then what did you do and how did that fit into the math? So just know, I'm just giving you that information so you can hold me accountable that we attracted all that information and dealt with it. So applicable published QI study findings, code purples, again, defined as emergent calls for security assistance. And then when higher numbers of people were trained within 90 days, monthly code purples dropped. This is the graph that the miracle of the only QI study in existence in the literature today shows that the hard work that you do to train people, this is the empirical, statistically significant data that shows it. To make this chart a little easy, all you got to take me forever to learn how to read this chart, but the further to the right you go is the higher percent of staff trained in the prior 90 days. And then this is a linear regression model, if you want to know the name. This line going straight down is the reduction in code purples. So this is the mathematical truth behind this study that proves the hard work that you do and that you train people makes a difference, and it is statistically sound and significant, and it is completely, relentlessly important for you to know that, so that when you're confronted, that people say, come on, does that really work? Does it really, don't you cause more problems sometimes than not by having this education? And the answer is absolutely. They're wrong, you're right. Okay, and this study proves it. So that being said, there's a 23% drop. So no, we dropped code purples, or the need for anybody to call assistance in for a violent situation dropped 23% during an entire 1-year study period. So the study was long, there was plenty of time for this not to be accurate, and 23% were reduced. So those are some big numbers, and those are some statistically significant numbers. Okay. That being said, we also found this. There's always a little bit of bad that comes with the good, or maybe it's not bad, maybe it's just different. Drops in code purples were not noted when training periods were larger than 120 days. So what that tells us is when we train everybody and we get them all up to speed, what this study says is people react, we reduce code purples, it's great. However, something happens at about 120 days, which means we need refresher training. I'm good for about 120 days, but to think that I'm okay for 2 years, I know our certification is about that long, to think that I'm okay, I'm not. We started to see some erosion of that 23% decline. So that's good news, meaning that what you do for a living, when you teach everyone, we need more of it. That's what this study shows. Another complex chart that we're going to show very easily. These are those confounding factors. These are the things that people say, yeah, but what about this? What about that? What do you think? And so for some of the arguments, psych patients, we know, and let me explain, these confounding factors come from research literature. When you get ready to do a study, you have to read a lot of different journal articles, and you read a lot of research, and there's a lot of research out there, not a lot of quality improvement, in fact none, but there's research. So these things come from research articles. So we know through research articles that higher percentages of psych patients correlate with more monthly code purples. That makes sense, that's inarguable. I think most of us live that life, we know it. Higher 90-day employee turnover correlates with more monthly code purples. That makes sense. Have you heard people come in and say, look, I can't do this anymore. Our ED's changing, we're seeing a different type of person, I just don't want to do it. I want to go work, I want to go work at Wendy's. I don't want to do this anymore, okay? And so, interesting point, when we can talk about it a little bit later, but I'll caution you on watching why people leave. I've been kind of noting why people leave with turnover. And when you hear things like, I really like my job, I love everybody here, I love my colleagues and my coworkers, but I get too tired at the end of the day, or I'm not enjoying my work anymore. Caution on that, because I do believe that's associated with something's going on that's different in their work environment, and it could be something personal, it could be other things, we don't have that studied yet, But I personally have a belief that there's something to do with some violent activity as we see things change in healthcare. And I think we all agree it's changing. And I listened to one of your general sessions to where we all know it's escalating. It's not going down. So I think just caution on that. Higher percentages of psych patients correlated with higher 90-day turnover. Okay, a very difficult group to take care of. This is all statistically significant. And here it was. Here's what finally happened and popped with the numbers. The core finding of the study was the higher percentage of NCI-trained ED employees within the past 90 days, so 90 days prior, correlated with fewer monthly code purples. This is what directly relates to that graph I just showed you in the prior slide, the linear regression table. So this is statistically sound data. It has been challenged. It has been looked at in many different ways. And so you can actually, when you have this study and you want to reference it, this is what you take and say, I can tell you when I train people, I can reduce code purples. And it's true. This is fun. And I want to begin early with the guys in the room. I want to apologize to you because I can't help it. This is data, this is math, right? It's not me, it's math. And what it says was, the higher percentages of male ED staff equated to longer wait times. So I know we've got an ED director in here, and so an ED throughput's a big deal, I think, in a lot of acute care organizations. So it doesn't say why, it doesn't say if it's right or wrong, it just says. Okay, so more to come on that, but not picking on the guys, that's just math. All right. So key points to take away from this study. NCI training affected the incidence of code purples. Yes, absolutely. The NCI training impacts persisted despite the presence of confounding factors. Mental illness, turnover, the things we just talked about. So even though we had those things, those are the things that people come back at you and say, yeah, but we have a lot of this, we have a lot of that. NCI training reduced the need for code purples to the tune of 23% despite all of the confounding factors. And we also know that periodic training, more training for our staff needs to occur. Second objective we had today was the need for training. And then I find this interesting, even though this is just like kind of a no-brainer, like that was not real difficult to say that we know for a fact this works, we still have a lot of work to do to convince people, or actually our decision makers, right? We have a lot of work to take and defend this notion, even with even knowing that it works. So we got to gain general buy-in, and it's very difficult. And where it's most difficult is at an organization who isn't a believer yet. There's organizations out there that and I'm not putting anybody's organization down because I look in the mirror every time I say this, but we've got organizations that, number one, don't think their organization's ever going to have this problem. Because after all, that's not the kind of patients we have, and we live in this part of the world, or this is what we've done we've got a new parking garage and we added a security guard, and it's just not going to happen, right? And it's just a very naive way of thinking of things. It's a lovely way to think, it's very calming, but it's very naive. And so organizations who have had a disastrous situation usually are a little bit more receptive. Now that's the good and bad. I don't want anybody to have a disastrous problem to believe this, but we tend to see that more frequently. So arguing and good debate is essential, and that's what we're going to try and help you with today. So when you go back and debate why we want to have this done, or why do we need further NCI training, this journal hopefully will help you, this publication will help you with that. That's a gentleman from To Kill a Mockingbird who seems to be quite a good bargainer. Complexities. All of the things in that just went away. Complexities don't we wish they just went away as quickly as a PowerPoint can make them go away, but they don't. The challenge is workplace violence is unpredictable. I bet you that movie theater last night in Lafayette never really even thought about something like this happening to them, okay? Or they certainly didn't think, on a Thursday night, something like that was going to happen. And so it's unpredictable. And that's the problem we face. It's unpredictable. And when you go in and you try and debate something that says, we think at some point, sometime, somewhere in our lifetime, something's going to happen and we need to spend all this money to keep everybody prepared for maybe that one time that it might happen. Well, if your senior team is like mine, it's kind of like, well, then why don't you just maybe think about bringing that back another time sometime? You know, it's kind of like, it's just in the air. It doesn't work. So we've got to make sure that we understand that we're going to have to fight that problem with something else. These are things that happen all the time. I know in my organization, everyone says, well, you know, Sally, we added security. You know, we added a guy with a gun. We added light environmental factors. How many lights can you put in the parking garage, you know, and still think that you're going to make sure that all of these problems go away? All those things help. We know that helps. A lighted parking garage, the ability to lock down your ED, the ability to do things like that all help. But there's one thing that helps more than anything, and that's why we're all here, and that's why we're all committed to this very thing, and that's training. And why is because the predictability from NCI training investments can cloud issues when resources hang in the balance. What we know is when we look at the competition for these resources, it clouds why we need to continue to focus on it, but we still will get there and focus on it. And then the unpredictability, still we have to account for the factors that are associated with unpredictability, and we'll talk about that real quickly in just a minute. Known factors. All right. I know, all right, I'm on confession here. If I'm driving on I-35 in Austin, Texas, and the speed limit through Austin is 60 miles an hour, and I push it to 65, the chances are when I see a person who looks like that sitting in a car, I might tend to lower my speed to 60. Probably none of you ever drive over the speed limit. But when I see that gentleman, I'm like, I think I probably should reduce my speed if I want to reduce my chances of a ticket. So we know that the presence of something like this takes a certain group of people and says, calm down, and they will. Does it happen to everybody? Absolutely not. You know, that's no safety there. But sometimes senior leadership teams, of which, by the way, I'm one, so that's why I can talk about them. Senior leadership teams go, we spent a lot of money on security. I mean, come on. We've got somebody with a gun and a taser and a bat and whatever, and we think we should be safe. We're not. Training. We've already said that this is important, okay, but we need more of it. Employee turnover. We know we've got to account for employee turnover. This is not just a one-time thing and then it goes away and we're fine. Mental illness. Well, thought that this is very germane. This was actually in my presentation prior to last night. But this young man certainly made some very unfortunate decisions at the movie theater in Aurora. Now, granted, mental illness, particularly what I love about CPI and NCI training is we care about people. We understand that there's mentally challenged people, altered mental status people. We don't just write them off and say, well, you know, if you've got this diagnosis, then you're prone to having this kind of problem. We know that it's important that we've got to work with all kinds of people, and that's what I think the blessing is with CPI, that there's a problem behind somebody who makes choices like this. Then you've got this gentleman, okay? Everybody remembers Oklahoma City. He was another gentleman that made some very unfortunate decisions and killed a lot of people because of it. What we also know is there's a certain type of patient or person or guest or whomever, it's not limited to just patients, that can come into our facility, and if they come in and they're planning on killing somebody, just like the situation that I personally had to deal with in 2006 at our hospital, that man came in to kill himself and kill somebody else, there's nothing we can do about it. That's when we bring in, that's out of our bailiwick, and we back off, and that's when we let the gentleman on top take care of things. And that happens in our hospital, unfortunately, more frequently than what you want to think. So, obtained from the research literature, these are other areas, and this got talked about a little bit yesterday. Socioeconomic status. Research articles state that certain socioeconomic populations tend to be associated with higher levels of violence. I'm not saying true or false, I'm just saying in the research literature, this is what it says. That's true. Wait times in medical settings. So it got brought up. If I'm in an ED and I'm sitting out in the hall and I'm waiting for a long time, or I'm waiting to be seen, and that time escalates, then I tend to escalate. You know, where's the doctor? Who's not? You know, what's going on? I'm sick of this. My mom's out there in pain, and you guys are just talking about what you did last night. That tends to escalate, and then everything starts snowballing. So we know that to be true in the literature. Gender. It's really, I promise you, this is not to pick on guys, okay? But research articles show that oftentimes a male-dominated population of caregivers tends to accelerate or ignite certain types of people and their violence factor more than a female population. That's just in the literature. Remember, research articles don't tell you what to do about it. They just tell you this is related to that. So that's all true. And at the end of my presentation, there is all of the resource articles that you want to look at. All of these journal articles that I'm referencing that are research related are all there if you want to read them. You can have them. What I also want you to know is, in spite of those three indicators, in spite of all of that, NCI training still won out. In spite of all that. If you believe all the research that's out there, and we should because it's true, NCI training still reduced the code purples. So all of those confounding factors were all mitigated. They were mathematically mitigated and done correctly. So I still want to leave you with, in spite of all of that, what we do for a living, what you do for a living, still reigned well. All right, gaining senior leaders' input can make it or break it, right? We can all think it's a great idea, but if your CEO or CFO says, sorry, we got to worry about new monitors, and we're putting in new flooring on the 5th floor, sometimes this is going to be difficult to compete with. Productivity, I don't know about you all, I have to sit in a productivity meeting, to plan for the productivity meeting, to plan for the productivity call, to discuss why we were over 2.1 FTEs for the week. That happens. And so that's when we get back to, so what are you going to do about it? Oh, let's cut that class that we have on Thursday. We don't need it, or we can push it off till next month. Those are the things we have to deal with. Many leaders don't believe training is needed until a crisis unfolds. You can bet when a crisis unfolds, that's the right moment for saying, hey, maybe we need to train our staff a little bit, or maybe there's higher interest levels. And isn't it unfortunate that we have to wait for that time? Wouldn't it be great if we could really negotiate this with people long before an incident happens? Because we could prevent some of these things. We could de-escalate. We could calm everyone down and make everyone go about their way and hopefully be better people because of it. So how do we get their buy-in? Despite everything we've just spent the last few minutes talking about, despite that, there's two ways we can look at trying to do this, cost versus benefit. Cost of training, this is the easy one. And then we're going to look at the benefits derived from the training. That's the hard one, and I'll tell you why momentarily. The cost calculation. Cost is easy. It's very easy. You can train NCI trainers, your time. It's either costing you personally or it's costing your organization for you to be here today. It's expensive. Travel, training fees. But the thing is, while it's expensive, we can still put an exact figure to it. So there's a mathematical point we can calculate that to. It's black and white. And then there's costs associated with training employees. So when you go back to your respective areas and you're getting ready to train your staff, well, we've got to bring them in, we've got to pay their salaries, we've got to do all the things that it would cost to do. So easy to it's pretty easy math. We can add it up, and it's pretty black and white. You can do that. Okay, here's the benefits. Benefits are far more difficult to calculate. Problems occur. It's not black and white. It's not, and I'll tell you why in just a minute, but it's very difficult. They're not purely financial. These benefits, so that the cost-benefit ratios, the benefits are not black and white. The concrete numbers are only there when you have to look at OSHA and you look at people that actually calculate actuarials that calculate harm to patients. If I break my arm, or my arm is broken, I go to the ED, I can associate an absolute cost with that, my rehab time, and then I'm done, right? So that's pretty easy to do. But guess what? There's other things that we have to include. So cost of medical treatment, loss of productivity, cost of damage to facilities and equipment, and cost of litigations. Those are fairly easy to find. Just a couple of months ago, we had a gentleman in our MRI scanner, and he didn't want to be in there, and he made it extremely clear, verbally he didn't want to be in there, and he also made it extremely clear he was going to take and dismember the entire MRI scanner, which he did to the tune of about $100,000. And so we understood where he was coming from. So benefits, there's other factors, and what I like to refer to these as silent factors, because again, they're not like this problem equaled this amount of money. These are silent factors. Violent exchanges don't result in physical injury, but damage still has impacts. For example, my emotional problems, things that are associated with if I just got completely dismantled because of a horrific exchange of words that were threatening. How do you measure that? You know, how do you put a number to that? You really can't. You really can't easily do that. Career abandonment. The situation that happened to me in 2006, we had 4 highly skilled registered nurses who not only left our hospital, they left the practice of nursing, okay? Because they said, I'm ruined for life. I'll never be able to deal with this again. And that kind of goes into even more of what happened with the patient and on down the line that we'll save for another day. But that happens. How can one rely on the factors of inside support when they're not predictable? So you've got all of these soft indicators, and then they're not predictable. Take me, for example. I'm still thinking about what happened in 2006. So you don't think when I hear a fire alarm now, and you don't think when someone says water's dripping, I have a little bit different thought about what's going on than what I did on that day. I think very much about it, you know. So those things happen. So what then can we measure? When you've got to look at these soft variables, when you've got to argue this very, very difficult and complex area, what do you got to measure? It's risk. This chart shows how to measure risk, or things to look at. The employee impact, or the silent factors that I was just talking to you about. Decrease in productivity due to adverse impacts on employee morale, meaning I hate my job, I hate what I'm doing. That's where I'm talking to you about when you see those employees start saying, things are changing around here, I'm not happy, it's not my salary, it's my working environment. Be aware of some of those things. PTSD, you guys are the pros at understanding all of that. You know what that's about. Cost of recovery time if an injury occurs, mentally. Cost of medical treatment if injury occurs, that's where you've got those other things in there. These references to the right are incredible references. They are they're just the best of the best. They're landmark cases if you want to look at those. And again, I can send this PowerPoint presentation to any of you, so don't worry about it. We can get it to you. The patient impact, quality of care. If I'm not functioning, if you have a team that's been hurt by something mentally or physically, they're not going to function at their best. They're not. Your high performers will start being medium performers. You're going to start seeing a reduction in what their value is and what they're adding to their patients. And then what happens is your organization starts seeing that impact. Meaning, have you ever heard places where it's like, don't go to that hospital, don't go to that clinic, don't go see that doctor because of blah, 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 blah. These are the things that happen that you just really can't measure. And so senior teams, particularly our strategic people, they're always trying to put all kinds of numbers associated with why. And it's because of a competing, somebody put another freestanding ED in place over here, or somebody did something over there. Rarely can you get people's heads around, you know, maybe it's because they're scared to death of something that's going on and they don't know how to address it. And so the gift that you all bring to the table is teaching people how to address these fears and what to do with it constructively. Security costs, facility impact, and general liability, we've already looked at those things. But again, the main thing I wanted you to remember is what are factors you could look at to take risk into play? Because risk is how you're going to actually compete with it. And these are things that you can look at. So again, looking at productivity, why people leave, start adding those things up and you're going to probably be amazed at the cost. And the cost could be even exceeding those of, I got my, you know, I had 3 stitches because my face was scratched, or those type of things. I mean, they're very soft, but they're very expensive. So combining cost versus benefits, the cost of training. In our case, we have 3 trainers. I think we're very fortunate at our hospital. Again, 328 beds, 3 trainers like you, that's a gift. So we're very fortunate. And we have that because we believe in it. Our organization has a culture of believing in this. So throw some fees in, travel and lodging and time, that's the cost associated with getting you trained, and then the cost of employee training. What we did for this study is we assumed the worst case scenario of cost. When you put the worst case scenario of cost up there and then you kind of back off a little bit, it's easier to get it through your CFO's mind. So we assumed that 100% of the staff were trained, and we assumed that we were going to include refresher training once a year. So that would be 2 days a year or 16 hours a year for every full-time employee. And a full-time employee works about 2,080 hours of productivity time. And then that ended up being about 0.7, 0.8% of our payroll, so less than 1%. So the benefits. Remember that slide we went back to where we had a 23% reduction of risk of workplace violence events? When you put that all together, here's the bottom line, and this is the takeaway. Is it worthwhile to increase a fixed cost so those educational costs, by less than 1% to mitigate 23% of violence-related risk. Even this guy could clue in on that math, okay? So that's the story. That's why you can do it, and this study proves that. So you're not just coming up with good ideas or thought processes or what should happen. The study actually mathematically proved it scientifically. So a few more thoughts, and we're getting to the end. So a few more thoughts. The 23% decrease in the original study occurred, and if you recall, only 33% of our staff were trained over 12 months. So overall, we got 33% trained over 12 months. So we made that decrease of 23% with 33% of our staff trained. Remember, we had to include all that turnover and various things. The original study effects did not include refresher training. So we made that 23%, remember that line going straight down? With 33% of the staff trained, and we did it with the current program today, where we have training once every 2 years. That 1% would be the cost if all employees receive semi-annual training. So actually, our true costs were less than that, and we still made that 23% difference. Look at this. Can you imagine? And when I talk to you all in the room who we all love talking about this topic together, that's why I just appreciate being here so much, is that can you even imagine what that 23% might look like if we were able to look at employees being NCI trained at a higher rate? We can make a difference because we know it proves it makes a difference, and we can make even more difference if we looked at it differently or we added more education. Okay, so the next thing I get asked is, "That's great, Sally. I'm so special. We love your publication. We're so glad you've got this in the literature, and we can use that to help prove our case. But what have you done with it? You work for HCA, and I know there's some folks in here who work for HCA, and HCA sometimes is kind of big, and it takes a lot of discussion to get anybody to move on that. So then, and it's for appropriate reasons, I guess. What happened was NCI training is formally being tracked across our emergency services business lines at different levels. We have people out of Nashville, which is our core area where we have our super senior team, and they actually now are beginning to look at this training. They're looking at who's using it, who's not using it, what's it, they're not sure exactly about everything yet, but at least we've got their eyes open and they're looking at it. Nationwide audits have begun to assess these facilities. We have people coming into our EDs now, and they're assessing what might this organization need? What are they looking like? What's it looking like? And they're looking at all those things, all the confounding factors we talked about, and they're also looking at education. That happened as a result of this study because they too needed a study to say, why do we care? Why are we going to put all these resources across 188 hospitals? And so if it worked to convince that group, hopefully it'll work to help you convince your group as well. The other thing that I just want to talk about a minute, and again, I'm from Texas, and I don't know how many of you are from Texas, but this is Texas law. I had the privilege to represent the Texas emergency nurses, TONE, it's an organization of executives, THA, Hospital Association, and the Texas Nursing Association. So that's just 4 big areas. Not that that's important for you to know, but it's important that that's a lot of people, okay? That's a whole lot of people interested. House Bill 705, I was able to utilize this research to fight through the House and fight through the Senate as their expert witness. And we got House Bill 705 passed. This is important because what it did was it leveled the playing field of penalties to anybody harming a healthcare worker in an emergent environment. Prior to this bill being passed, if I was a firefighter, if I was a police officer, if I was a paramedic, if I was the police officer's canine officer dog, and that group of people was assaulted by the individual, that would be a felony assault. That person would receive a felony. If the nurse was standing right by all of those people, the nurse would have received, that gentleman would have, or female, would have received a misdemeanor A. And so this bill levelized that playing field. Now, we don't want anybody to go to prison for this. We would like to see this go away and never be used. But I just want you to see how government impact is actually changing and supporting us as care providers to say, this is not tolerable. This is not okay. One more happened, and this was in the 84th legislative session that just closed. And it's House Bill 2696. Again, this is Texas specific, but this is going to be really awesome and I think important for every one of you to know. What this was is a law that was signed by the governor last month, and what it does is empowers the Texas Department of Health and Human Services to perform violence-related studies in hospital environments. So what this means is, I know a lot of us don't always like more visitors to start measuring what we're doing, but in this case, it's going to allow the state to come into our organizations and say, how prepared are you for workplace violent events? And that's going to be big. And they're going to ask some very hard questions about how we're ready for this. And I am thrilled because this is a direct impact of this study as well. So hopefully you're getting the empowerment of using a study and using something that's scientifically evidence-based practice to move this healthcare area forward. Okay, closing comments, we're just about done. This is strictly a review. NCI training does reduce workplace violence incident rates. It's statistically proven. This study proves it. NCI training effects can be difficult to see because of the confounding factors. Everybody wants to argue some other reason why it's not important. The silent impact, those things you can't measure. Be aware of those. They matter. They are measurable. They're just not as easily measurable as some of the hard numbers. Viewing benefits in terms of risk, that's the secret. That is the secret to utilizing the soft indicators and making sure you can account for why this is important. And then again, as we all know, you all are the choir. The problem's growing and we all have a lot of work to do and a lot more learning to occur. This is my article, and I want you to, again, I can email this to you if you drop me off a card. I'll leave it up there for just a second. The Advanced Emergency Nursing Journal is where the article is published. And they are outstanding people. For those of you who aren't part of that journal, you know, whenever you try to go find a journal, you always get an abstract. You never are able to get the full article down. So the journal has opened this article up for the next 30 days. So if you'd like to go into it, and you go into it this way, then you can just click on it and you can print the whole journal, the whole article down. And that's really kind of good. So I'll leave that up there for a minute, and I can go back if we need to. All right? So the main thing is just getting that down and then the issue. All right, I'll go back to that in a minute if you like. This is my contact information. You can call me for anything. Please email if you have any questions. I personally am a lifer. I'm committed to this. I'm committed to NCI training. I'm a believer. And you know I'm a believer because you know I showed you where I'm coming from with this. And I can't thank each and every one of you enough for what you do because you're out there fighting the fight and doing the hard part.